So in this video we are gonna learn how to create a network request using URLSessions library that is provided by Apple itself. It's an inbuilt framework, it's an inbuilt library in Foundation as well as UI kit. And the first lesson we will learn how to create a get request. So there are usually four kinds of requests. I'll go through a basic theory first. So there are four kinds of most popular requests that we make on a network. So as you can see on this page, this is a website where they have created a mock API. It doesn't do much, it doesn't have any large functionality, but it's very convenient API to learn how to use REST APIs and all the different ways we can call it. So the four ways that are there to call an API are get, post, put, and delete. So what these four requests are: get means when you request a data, when you request someone's information, or you request a list of information, list of users, list of recipes. So that's get. It's the most simple request. When you open a page, like when you open google.com, yahoo.com, request response.in, it makes a get request which tells the user, oh, I'm asking for the home page, and it sends you the home page, or it sends you the JSON response to show it on your mobile app or any front end. And post is when you send the data, like a registration form. So when you fill up a registration form, you click the submit or register button, it sends the information that you have filled in that form. That's post. You're posting the information, and it's doing some action in the back end to save that data or do something with the information that you have sent. Put is when you want to update a certain data. It's similar to post, very similar to post, but it means that you are modifying an existing data that is already there on the server. And delete is, as it says, delete. It deletes some information from the server. So the first video is just about get requests. We will learn how to make a network request. We will learn um, how to get the information and transform it into a readable format um, on our client, on the iOS app, or using Swift basically. So I'm not gonna create any user interface. I'm gonna just simply use a Swift playground, but we will see how we can transform the information that we get from the backend and then show it in the console, right? So this is the web page that you can go to get the URL, and we will use the first URL, list users. So as it says, it lists the users. So if you click on the link here, you can see that it will give you a list of users. So I will open this in Postman, and we will remove this page too. We will just call up till users, and it will return us the response in this JSON format. So it has a couple of objects there. It has a object called page, per page, total pages, and data. And data is an array of further objects. And these objects look very similar. Every object in the data has an ID, an email, a first name, a last name, and an avatar. And at the end, we have another object called add, which is just the advertisement for this API. So what we are gonna focus is, we are just gonna focus on this. So I'll copy paste it for you. Let me open it. So we are just gonna focus on this, or you can say this. So it's a JSON that has a data object, and data is an array, and each element in that array is of this object type which has these 5 properties. So we will open our playground, and it's an empty playground as of right now, and we will start by creating the URL. So we will first copy the URL from our Postman or from the website, and we'll create the URL object using string. And we know this is the correct URL, so we will forcefully unwrap it. Otherwise, usually in a Swift application, in an iOS application, what you will do is you will do a guardlet and then else return. So here, because we don't have a function here that we are calling, so we don't need to return anything. Or what we can do is we can make a function. So that's how we will create a URL, and then we will use the URLSessions class. So UIKit or a foundation framework has this class called URLSession, and we call the shared object. So it's a singleton object, and then it has several data task methods, right? So it has data task URL, data task URL request, and then these publisher methods, which are the newer ones that use the combine framework. So we are not learning combine right now, but in future videos we will learn about combine framework and how to make network calls using combine as well. So there are 4 data task methods that we will focus on right now. First are these two, URL request, and then there are very similar ones that take URL request, but they take a completion handler as well. So what completion handler is because this is a network request, it runs on a background thread. When you make a call to the network, it goes into the background, makes the network call, and when the network call is successful, it calls this completion handler. So it is completion handler is basically a function that we pass into this data task method, that it will run at a later point of time when it makes the network request and the network request is completed. It gets some information from the request. So in this video we will focus on just one method, which is data task with URL and completion handler. So here we will pass the URL object that we created above, and then here we will use the completion handler. So once your tab is focused here, just press enter, and then this completion handler is a function basically that will execute it at a later point of time. I'm saying it again and again because it's an important concept of closures that you should have basic understanding if you are learning how to make network requests. So this function takes 3 parameters. The first parameter is a data. This is the data that we get in return from our request. So for example, here when we made the get request, we received all this information. So this is the data that we'll get, right? But it is in a form that's not understandable to us. If we just try to print this data object, we can't understand what it is in there. It will just tell us how much bytes of information, or the information that we have, how much memory is it consuming, right? Then we have a URL response object. So this object basically has the information about the response that we have received. For example, here you can see that the status says 200 OK. So this object will have that information, that what is the status of the response. There are many different statuses. There is 200 OK, which means everything went well. One of the status I think you are very familiar with that you find often is when you enter a wrong URL on a website, it says not found. 404 not found. Many times it says that. So 404 is the code and not found is the status. If it's 404, it means that URL is not found or that information is not found. Then there is another very common one, which is 500, which is that when something went wrong in the server, when some weird thing happened, maybe their server is down or the server have making have problems making a database connection or some sort of problem on the server, then it will give you 500 server error. So in this case, we will not focus on the URL response, we will focus on data, and then we'll focus on error. Errors, basically if something goes wrong, like we are getting 404 or we are getting 500, specifically 500, then we will have information in the error object. Otherwise the error will be nil. If everything goes fine, error will be nil, right? So we will focus on data, then type, we will give that function parameter a name. We will focus on the response, we will give it a name. We will focus on error and give it a name. So when we are under this block, right, it means our request is complete. We have received information from our network request. Either it's successful, either it's not, but we don't know yet. So here we will check whether the request was successful or not. We know it got finished, it's done, but we don't know what happened with the request, right? So the first thing in such a scenario we have to do is check for error, whether we have an error or we don't. So we will check the error object first, and we will check it using guardlet, or we can, right, or we can use here iflet. If there is an error, then return, right, and then print the error here. We'll also print the description of the error. So if we get an error, we will just return from here and we won't have any information. We'll just print it on the console. Second, we will check whether there was data or not. If there wasn't any data, if the data was nil, it means we didn't received anything from the request, right? If we have data, then we will come here, and now we will print the data. I'll show you that what we get in this object. So this is basically this whole stuff that we are receiving here. It's the JSON, but this data object is in such a form that's not readable to us when we try to print it, right? So one thing that I'm trying to focus here right now is when you make this request, at the end of this curly brace, you have to call resume. Most often people forget to call this method. Many times they forget to do that, which ends up that we don't make their call, right? This whole method won't make the call unless you call this resume method. So make sure you are calling this. It's just one small thing that people usually forget, and this can spend multiple hours trying to figure out why they are not getting the response or why the request is not completing, right? Because the request is being made, so it's a small mistake that happens. Even experienced developers make this mistake. So we will run this. I will call this method here first, and then run this playground. So you see it says 1221 bytes. So basically it means we are getting the information. But now we want to convert this information. So it prints out like this, right? So for that we need to do a couple of things, and those things will be covered in the next video. Thank you.